Mr. Stevens says, I'm arresting you on suspicion of armed robbery. You do not have to say anything. But
myself again, but it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not true. And it feels alright when they come and say to you.
Good afternoon, welcome along to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wright. It is the Eddie Howe press conference review, but we're also going to look ahead to the game tonight. Newcastle taking on Leicester City at home, 8 o'clock start, live on Sky Sports, sold out crowd as usual, 1,300 Leicester fans coming up to make it a bit of an atmosphere. And their war flags are going to round off another wonderful season at St James's Park, with flags placed on every seat, as we've all seen on social media, and a new surfer flag which will be unveiled, which will cover the entire East Stand. Fans asked to get up to the ground for 7:45 tonight. Plenty of time to help create a wonderful atmosphere. And please don't take the flags with you at the end of the game. Make sure you take those flags, wave them high, and then leave them back on the seat. As we're going to find out in the press conference, there was very little given away as regards injuries. A lot of stuff floating around the internet today, though, would suggest that we will at least see Jacob Murphy at some point tonight, and potentially Sean Longstaff, who NUFC blog has quoted today as saying that potentially Longstaff is trained, he could be available. We'll wait and see. I bumped into Dean Smith on my walk this morning from Leicester City. He was up nice and early contemplating a night at St James's Park. But let's get on to the press conference. Press conference was a couple of days ago, and Reza, as always, was first up with his questions. And he said, you'll be looking for the same again from the crowd as you had against Brighton on Monday night. And he said, yeah, no doubt. The crowd will be there for us. It's a tactically different game. It's a tough match, and we will need the crowd behind us. He said, you're going to have to use the squad because obviously you have got injuries. He went, he says, for me, after this press conference, it's straight to the physio room. There are a few concerns. The players have given a hell of a lot to this season physically. And he basically mentioned Willock. He says Willock is in trouble. It's unclear what the injury is, but he may well have played his last game of the season. Razor moved on to Longstaff and said, is there any possibility that he might play? He says it is doubtful that he'll play. He hasn't really trained, but he is improving. Razor moved on to Anderson then, Elliot Anderson, and said, is this time for him to, make his mark and to step up? And he said he's he's played an important role for us. He came on and he turned the Forest game. Reza pushed it a little bit more. He just said, how do you think, he's developed? He said, I think he would consider himself a fully integrated member of the squad now. He says, for any player, it's difficult to wait and get your chance, but he's managed to control his emotions, and overall he's improved his game. There was things and part of his game that he needed to improve, and he's done just that this season. He said he's ready to step up. He's versatile, which is a massive help in modern day football, that you can play more than one role. But yeah, Eddie reiterated he feels he's ready and he's capable, should he need to rely on Elliot Anderson tonight in that starting lineup. Reza moved on to the opposition, mentioned Leicester, obviously said, they're in trouble. Does that show you, what kind of league the Premier League is, and Eddie agreed with him. He said, yeah, because it can happen to any team, things, results, injuries, whatever can conspire against you in a season. And 1 minute you're sitting in the European slots and, you're winning trophies. The next minute you're in a relegation battle. He said they've got a strong team. He says when you actually look at the squad, they've got a quality bench as well. They've got a good manager. But he said, Dean Smith was brought in, once Brendan left, and he's got a tough task. He reiterated that we need, to recreate on the pitch what we did against Brighton. And of course, he needs the support from the fans in the stands. So, as always, Eddie focusing on his job, but also making sure that, the fans are united with the team, and very important to give that kind of rallying call before the match. Reza then mentioned the fact that we're coming towards that part of the season where, awards are handed out, and, that he'd been nominated as a potential manager of the year. Trippier had been put in there as a potential player of the year, Isak as a young player, and others. And he said, it must be nice to get that kind of recognition, to be nominated for those kind of things. And he said, yeah, look, I can't speak any more highly of the players than I have in the past. And it is great to see the players getting recognised for their work that they've put in this season. He said, obviously, it's nice to be considered for an award for myself, but that's down to the players, that's down to the staff, that's down to the owners. He said, I'm just part of that journey. So as you would expect, Eddie Howe's not standing there waiting for a pat on the back. He's he shares it. He shares that kind of nomination. He shares that kind of feeling. He realizes that it's not a one-man team. It's not a one-man job. It's part of being a team that gets you to where you want to be. And of course, he's proud of the fact that that's happened. But that if that award came, he said it's for everybody, not just for myself. Obviously, with this being a press conference that took place over the weekend, there was 2 games that were being played, which Eddie was asked about. He's asked about the Gateshead game. He wished them well. Obviously, we know now the Gateshead went into the Wembley final and came away losing by 1-0. He did wish Mike Williamson well, of course, a former Newcastle United player, and mentioned that he got to know Mike in recent months. He'd been into the club and he'd been having treatment on what he described as a nasty knee injury. But he just said, he says, look, he deserves huge credit. It's difficult to manage at that level where resources are tight and, you're living day to day. But he just congratulated Gateshead on what really has been an eventful season, but a memorable one in so many ways, in the fact that they looked down and out, but they got out of relegation and, of course, got to a final. So well done, Gateshead. It was the message from Eddie Howe. Reza then just said how important is it to have a good relationship with a club like Gateshead? He says you've loaned Dan Langley out there, for instance. Is it beneficial to have that kind of relationship with one of your neighbours? And he went, yeah, of course it is. He says, I'm a big supporter of that kind of relationship, helping clubs locally and them being able to help us, whether it's by loaning a player to them or by playing a friendly if we need one. But we can help each other locally, and that's what it's all about. So Eddie, big supporter of that. Keith Downey was next from Sky Sports. He just said, how concerned are you about, availability of players for this game coming up on Monday night? Because he says, from where I sit in the ground, he says, at the end of the day, all I saw was, various people from the midfield part of the side limping out of the ground. And he says, is it a concern? He went... Again, I haven't had a chance to see the lads today, which of course was the weekend. But the trip to the physio room will tell me more. And he says sometimes when you see players, who look a bit battered and bruised after a game, a good night's sleep can change all that. And the injury being rested, you wake up the next morning, it's not as bad as you first thought. So, things can change. Keith then said, well, there's one thing for sure, because of the importance of this game and the fact that we need 1 point to qualify for the Champions League, they probably will all want to play. And he says, yeah, of course they will. They'll all want to be involved, he says, but it's my job as the manager to have to, to pick fit players, and pick players, who are available and who can do the job ultimately. So, we won't just be picking players because of their name and who they are and what they've done in the past. If they're not fit, they're not going to get picked, which, but it's just a simple answer to a daft question, really. How important is it, or was it, to boost the goal differences was Keith's more sensible question. Meaning, obviously, we were involved in a tight game. It was 2-1 at one point against Brighton, and then Newcastle went on to score another couple of goals. So, giving us a 7-goal advantage over Liverpool before they played Aston Villa. Anyway, yeah, it's a big bonus. It certainly helps, but we just take things game to game, day to day, which is the thing that Eddie Howe has consistently said through his press conferences. Keith was then asking about Bruno's celebration when he scored, and it was for a young boy called Arthur who'd been diagnosed with cancer. He asked Eddie what he thought about that, and the fact that Bruno had taken time to have Arthur at his house, and was taking a big interest in this young boy's illness. And he went, it shows a lot about him. He says collectively, as a club, we've been supportive of a lot of people who've had difficult times, this season. And he says Bruno's a caring person, and he's a gentleman off the pitch. And it didn't surprise me in the slightest that he had done that in his spare time, but also that he dedicated the goal to young Arthur. So yeah, but he said it's very important, that we are part of the community and we should be there to support, and we will be doing more of that, which was great. Andy Sixsmith was up next, and he went. He basically said, "We've talked about the injuries to the players. Are you okay? Have you got any injuries after your celebration the other night?" Obviously, pointing to the fact that he did get a little bit carried away when Callum Wilson's goal went in and Bruno's goals went in, I think. But he went, "Yeah, I'm okay." He says, "I've been to the gym today, and I'm trying to maintain how I look." Which I hope is okay. And there was a lot of laughter, and Andy said, yeah, you look fine. He then said that there was a lot of fans would have had a hangover after the Brighton game, with Newcastle, of course, close to getting a Champions League place. And he says, how were you when you woke up? And Eddie basically laughed. He said, well, I woke up with a nice feeling and a realisation was that we'd had a good result. He says some things when you wake up, you have to find out where you were, what was going on the day before, and then you realise, well, we had a good day at the office. So he's he just he smiled and laughed at that particular question. Andy, who does his homework, the lads, I've said this before on here, and he said that was your 550th game as a manager. How do you feel about reaching that particular milestone? And he says, as you know, Andy, I don't pay much attention to stats, and I didn't have a clue. He says, but it's nice to hear that. And he says, when I first took up management, I would never have dreamt in a million years that I would have been, still managing 550 games on. He says, but yeah, it's a good stat, and it's nice to hear. Andy then mentioned the fact that fans don't demand a team that win, but they demand a team that tries. Of course, an infamous flag that that was put up in St James's Park quite a while back now. But he said, what's your feelings on that? And he says, well, that's exactly what we tried to do. We tried to give the football club a team that leaves itself on the pitch, empties itself on the pitch, is the way that he describes it. He says, I want the team to be a representation of me, and I want them to give their all for the shirt. But he says, I've got to compliment the players, because throughout the season, that is exactly what they have done. They have given it their all, and apart from maybe the odd game, I can't criticise them at all for the effort that they've put in. Certain games, he said, the cup game, for example, and maybe where the players had an off day, and not played up to their usual high standards, is he says it happens, but thankfully it hasn't happened too much at St James's Park this season, and that's why we are where we are. Callum Wilson was next on Andy's question list, and he said he scored 11 goals since the start of April, which is the best in his career. Is this the best you've ever seen Callum Wilson play? And he said he'd probably say he's had better. He says, my first season at Bournemouth, he was fantastic. He said we had a year in the Championship where he was absolutely superb as well. But yeah, he said, he's in a rich vein of form, and he's so much more than just a goal scorer. He's somebody who, has got a bit of intelligence, and his intelligence on the pressing side of Newcastle United's game is evident for all to see, and has been massively beneficial in this run-in. So he had nothing bad to say about Callum Wilson, that is for sure. Andy then said, have you got a particular message that you'd like to give the city of Newcastle and the supporters? And he just said, try and support the team as best you can. He said the atmosphere against Brighton was great. He says, there was no nervousness that I felt when Brighton scored, and he says they got behind the team. And he says the one thing is that it's been consistent. The support we've had from the people of Newcastle has been consistent. And all I would say is, please keep doing what you're doing. It's simple as that. Andy then asked him if there was going to be a lap of honour, similar to the one we had last year. I mean, if you remember last year, dear me out. I mean, nobody wanted to go off. There was one point where the stadium announcer, Rob Byron, was left to put on tunes he would never normally put on. But Amanda and Mia, Dad and Jamie came down on the pitch, and it was bedlam really, and rightly so. We survived, what looked as if it was going to be a foregone conclusion. We were going to go down, but we managed to pull off the great escape. So this season, of course, and tonight, should we get that point or 3 points that we hope for, then Newcastle United will be in the Champions League. So you would imagine there'll be similar scenes tonight. Certainly will be a lap of honour. And for a team that got to a cup final and lost a narrow game 2-0, and a team that is qualified for Europe at the following season, they deserve a massive lap of honour. There's been times where they've given a lap of honour and it's been embarrassing. So yeah, I like many others will be in that stadium clap. And I think he said there was no discussions. He's in Leicester mode, is what he said. Focusing on the team, focusing on the result, and ultimately from his perspective, no discussions have been had about a lap of honour at the time of the press conference. Andrew was next from the BBC. He says, is that the closest 4-1 that you've watched it live? Again, referring to the Brighton game. It was at times it was quite a tight game. He said, ultimately for him, he said he felt it was a good game. He says, Brighton are a top team. They're well coached. He says, it was a fascinating watch for me as a manager. He says, I thought the game ebbed and flowed at times. He says, but, tactically, I enjoyed it as a spectacle. Andrew then said, well, how did you change things? And he says, well, first half we were front foot. He says, we're regaining the ball with ease from Brighton. The they weren't really in it. Second half, he says they changed tactically. We couldn't high press. He says so we had to revert to like a counter-attacking game. He said, but we managed to do what we do and do it well, and we got the points. Andrew then said Trippier's set plays weren't as good the other night as they had been in the past. Eddie defended him. He just says, well, I think he was okay the other night. And he says, I'm going to defend him because I think he's been very consistent throughout the season. And yes, we haven't had goals from Kieran Trippier's free kicks, but, his free kick distribution has been very, very accurate. So difference of opinion there between Eddie and Andrew from the BBC. He then moved on to Joe Linton. He said, what did you make of his performance the other night? He said he was fantastic. He says he's a machine who will run through a proverbial brick wall for you. He says, but I think he succumbed to that brick wall against Brighton. And I mean, he is right, Eddie, because, watching the game back, Joe Linton was up and down. He was getting treatment. He looked as if he played the full season, and he has. He's put everything onto the pitch for everybody, and there was potential injury doubt over him, but I do think he's going to be okay tonight. I think he's one of those players who will continue to run through the pain barrier just to get the job done. There's going to be more games next season, regardless of whether you're in Europa or the Champions League. Andrew said. Do you think Newcastle United in this particular squad can cope? Eddie just smiled and went, well, that's a good question. We need to figure that out. He knows more or less it's going to be Champions League, and he knows that we're going to need more players, 100%. So Andrew followed that up with, does it mean more signings in the summer? And he said, well, yeah, because you need a big squad. He says, we've rotated this year, but, rotations are going to become more important next season. We're going to need to do more of that. And from our perspective, we're going to need a bigger squad. So signings are going to happen. Signings are going to be important. And in essence, he said, in an ideal world, you need a replacement 11. You need 11 who can play the game for you and 11 who can come in and do the job for you when those players aren't available. So, it's rotation is going to be very key next year. Was on to the written press next. Damien focused in on Elliot Anderson. And again, just said, is the time coming for Elliot Anderson to step up and to become a regular? And he answered this a little bit earlier on. He's answered it before. He said he would have played more games if it hadn't been for the players around him performing so well. He says, but when you look at our midfield in general, he didn't name names, but you just think Bruno, you think Joe Linton, you think Almiron, you think Willock, ASM. He said our midfield is up there with the best performing players in the league, so it's very difficult for him to get into that team. But again, he reiterated he's versatile. He can play more than one position, which is beneficial for him. And he said when he went out on loan to Bristol last year, he showed that he's a big game player, and he can do a job for anybody. So, he's going to get that opportunity at some point, and it's up to him to maintain the levels that he's capable of and keep other people out. So, it's as simple as that, really. Got to do with Phil Foden, hasn't he? I would guess. Top four, does that make up for the Wembley Cup final defeat, was Damien's next question. It was a long pause from Eddie, and he just said, well, I've not really thought of it like that. He says, nothing replaces, that kind of feeling. And he said, well, actually, he says, I got over it quite quickly. And then he backtracked and said, well, I didn't. He says, that feeling hasn't gone, that disappointment of not winning the cup final. But then he said it's a different competition. A cup final, a cup run is completely different to the league. You have to show the consistency throughout the season. So it's two completely different competitions, and to compare them probably, is very difficult, is the answer that he gave. Miles was next up from the Shields Gazette. He said Lewis Miley's been on the bench and involved with the squad for the last few games. is he ready if needed? Eddie said, yeah, look, he's a great talent. He's been training with the first team, not all season. The biggest compliment I can pay him is that he just hasn't looked out of place. Some of the drills that we do, he says, are intense and at a certain level, and he survived those drills and not looked out of place. And he just said there's no question marks over him. So again, very similar to Elliot Anderson, when he gets the chance, if he gets the chance, he's ready. And then he's got to take the chance, is more or less what Eddie said. He's got to go in there and with the right attitude, and if he gets the chance to impress, then he's got to impress. Miles then asked about Jacob Murphy. Would he be ready for tonight's game? Again, he said he hasn't trained. He's been with the physios for a long time, but because this press conference was done over the weekend, he said, I'll go and have a look. Now, the rumours and the stories that's coming out of certain avenues today is that Murphy should be okay for tonight. So we will watch this space. Jordan from Newcastle World next up, and he said, could you have imagined that you would be going into this last home game with a possibility of finishing in the Champions League? And he said, not at the beginning of the season, no. He says, because in the first half of the season, our thoughts were just about winning games and collecting as many points as possible. He says, it didn't really sink in that it could be, we could be in that situation until after the World Cup. He says, ultimately from our perspective, the World Cup break really, really did help us, and we had a break, and, players regrouped and probably could have spoiled our rhythm, but it didn't. And it was only after that we started looking at things and thinking, well, this is, potentially something that we could do. It could be credible, that we could end up being, being up there and challenging. So yeah, Jordan then asked about, how did the game feel at Brighton? Did it feel big? A big game? Did you enjoy the atmosphere? And he went, yeah. He says it did feel big, a big game. He says because it was against a top team who just beaten Arsenal. He says the manner that we won against Brighton was pleasing. And certain things were, certain things pleased me. So yeah, he did feel like it was a big game. Lee Ryder was next, and he said, you've been in the Champions League positions, Liverpool haven't. Is it fair to say that if you get Champions League, you deserve it? And he went, yeah. He says, after 38 games, we are where we are, and we will deserve to be where we deserve to be. So, you can say what you want about 36 games, but 38 games is what matters. So, again, playing things down, keeping it cool. But yeah, that was the answer to that question. Lee then, of course, asked about Villa and Liverpool. Will you be interested in it? And he goes, when does it kick off? He says, yeah. He says, well, I'm going to be fully focused on the Leicester game. So he claimed he wouldn't be watching it. Whether he did or not, who knows? Lee then moved on to the players playing through the pain barrier, and he said, look, that happens every season. He says players are asked to do it. Players are asked to do it at times. I says, but in football, you don't disclose. You don't show you don't show your hand to the opposition. He said, football's a tough job physically. The majority of the squad have to play through injuries at times, and it's just part and parcel of modern day football. Kieran was next, and he was talking about Anthony Gordon and how's he settled in. He mentioned the fact that when the goals went in on the weekend and he was involved in the celebrations, it looks like he settled in. And he went, look, he came in January, and it can be difficult to come in halfway through a season. He says, but I think he's really starting to settle down and settle in. He says, I watch him. He's when he's having lunch, for example, with the players at the training ground, he's in the core of the group. And he said, look, I just really can't wait to have a full pre-season with Anthony because, I know that he's got a lot more to come. I know that he's got a lot more to offer. And then Kieran mentioned the Brighton game, and because it was it was live on TV, as most of our games have been, it has to be said. But because of the fact that it was a comprehensive win against another team that was on our coattails for most of the season, he says, does that help to sell the club to other players? And he went, yeah, because he says, I think people watch the game on TV and they see the atmosphere, they hear the atmosphere, they see the togetherness of the team, they see the fact that the fans and the team are united, and they see that Newcastle United is just a great place to play football. So of course it does. That kind of exposure on TV, there is no doubt that helps sell the football club globally and worldwide, and will hopefully make his job a lot easier when he's trying to get people to come and sign for Newcastle next season. Craig Hope was next. He said, what was your aim at the start of the season? And he said, well, it was improvement. And when I say improvement, it was, first and foremost, not to be involved in a relegation battle. And then the aim was to just improve each year. And the eventual aim, I guess, he says, was to get where we potentially are now, which is playing European football. So Craig then asked him, well, what challenges does that bring with such an accelerated journey like the one that you've had, the one you've had now? And I think most of us have probably discussed this in a pub or, with our mates on WhatsApp groups. Expectations are raised. And anything that you get below what we've had this season will be looked at as failure. For next year, it's a big year again, and we start again. And I think that's one of the things that, and I'll put a separate message out about this. I think I'll do a YouTube short about this at some point. We've got to remember that, if we do finish, say, third this year, and we've been to a cup final, but let's say next year we finish sixth and we don't get to a cup final, you've still got to support the manager and the players. Don't get on the back. Don't have a go. Still support them. Do you know what I mean? And past years, Bobby Robson, prime example. So Bobby, when we dropped to fifth, I think it was, people wanted his head, wanted him sacked. And we've got to learn from those mistakes, as a fan base. Let's hope that doesn't happen again. But yeah, Eddie, getting back to Hope's question, was, he answered it exactly the way I expected him to. And it shows that the guy is fully clued up and he's not daft. Luke Edwards, the comedian today, basically said, what was that nice feeling you woke up with this morning, Eddie? So Eddie laughed. The whole press corps laughed. And he said, I'll have to keep this answer clean. And then he paused and then looked at Luke and said, I'm sure you've had it, Luke. Lots more laughs. He then moved on and, he was talking about, are you not tired of saying that the job's not done, to us? And he said, well, you guys, you've got a job to do. You're going to ask that question. He says, it's getting easier now. He said, because we've only got 2 games left. So we're nearly at the end of the season and he's not going to be getting asked those questions anymore, is he? But you could see where Luke was coming from with that one. Jacob was next, asking about Anthony Gordon again, asking which position he saw him in. He says, he's a midfielder. Do you see him as a midfielder? Do you see him as a winger? Jacob's answer from Eddie was that, he feels that he's versatile. He's not just an out-and-out winger. He played as a 9 at Everton. He's played at a 10 for us. He's played in number 8 position for us against Liverpool. He says he's done well in every position that we've asked him to. And he said being versatile is massively important for us, signing him on. And he said, just look at Joe Linton. He's played every single position across that midfield this year. So being versatile has its bonuses for us, but also for the player. He then asked, Jacob then asked about Miley. He said, did pulling Lewis Miley out of the England squad that he was picked for highlight the fact that you have got some injuries concerns? And he went, yes. He said, it was really hard, for me to do that because there's nothing more than we would have liked than to see Lewis Miley represent his country at that level. He says, but we have got a lot of injuries, and I decided that, it was more important that he was here for the club. And, he's potentially got an important part to play. So, although it's sad that we've had to do that, club before country every time. Okay, so that was Eddie's interview. The club have started interviewing players, and I just thought, just listening to the players and what they say, sometimes it's beneficial. So Callum Wilson was up this time round. He was asked about the game. It was Andy Sixsmith who did the interview, and he asked him about the Brighton game, and he said it was a great game, a great night. He says it was important for our season. We tried to put in a good performance to give fans something to cheer about. But yeah, all in all, it was a good day at the office. He was asked about his temperament, really, and the penalties that he scored. In the game against Leeds, and then obviously another more goals that he scored over the succession of games. I think he mentioned the fact that he'd scored those 11 goals since April, something he asked in the press conference. He says, you always seem quite ice cool, but what are you actually thinking? When you're bearing down on goal at the Gallagher, for example, and slotting the ball in. And he just said, look, it's an amazing atmosphere to play in. He said, I love scoring goals at that end of the ground. But he says, all I'm thinking about is, staying composed. He said, it's difficult to celebrate. He was harking back to the Brighton game, and he said, it's difficult to celebrate too much. He says, in case it gets chalked off. And he says, that's just the way it is now. Obviously in a reference really to VAR. I mean, I think most of us who were at the game as well, Eddie Howe included, didn't celebrate that goal that he scored, the third goal against Brighton, because we felt, it might have been offside. So it's interesting to hear a player's perspective on that, it does affect the way they celebrate, just in case they're going to get chalked off. But he said it's always nice to see people's reactions. And he says, I love watching the games back and seeing how, the fans have celebrated or reacted, whether it's on Match of the Day or Sky or whatever. He says it's nice to see those reactions. Sometimes it's stuff that you miss, when you're actually playing. He asked him what the dressing room was like after the game against Brighton. He says it was quiet, surprisingly. He says I think everybody was knackered. He says, but we know now that we've got 2 games, and we can do it in these final 2 games. So yeah, I think it was a reflection in the dressing room, but also people were just very, very tired. Andy then said that he'd spoken to fans who said, we don't need Erling Haaland because we've got Callum Wilson. And what do you think's clicked since April, where you've scored all these goals? And he went, I don't know. He says, more maybe my change of form came after the trip to the Middle East. He admitted that the World Cup had taken its toll, and that there was, because he didn't have a break after the World Cup, whereas everybody else had a month off. Maybe that was what made things a little bit harder for him. But he said it's been a good season for him. And he's hoping to hit a few milestones. Andy asked him if he'd spoken to Alan Shearer, and he said, does he get texts off him? And he went, yeah, we are in touch. He says, I have spoken to him, and I get text messages after a game. He texts us after I scored those penalties against Leeds. And it is nice to be in touch, and it's beneficial having that kind of contact with a club legend. Andy then asked him if hitting 20 goals this season was a target. And he went, yeah. He says 6 weeks ago it probably would have seemed unlikely, but yeah, he says 20 goals is a target, and it'd be nice to hit that target this season. He then moved on to the fact that he'd been on the sidelines a bit. He says, the gaffer talks about you every week. Do you think you've benefited, from maybe being written off by certain quarters? And he went, look, there's pros and cons. There's been periods this season where I've heard things, people have shown us things, and I'm thinking, am I really playing that badly? He says, then there was that period where I found myself on the bench, and he says, yeah, maybe playing angry brings out the best in me. He says everyone's entitled to opinion, no. And only I can change that by putting in regular and consistent performances on the pitch. Andy then asked him, is it the best Callum Wilson that we have seen this season? And he went, I don't know. He says, I'm so laid back and chilled. He says, I just get on with the job. He says, I'd love to win Premier League Player of the Month at some point. So maybe that could be around the corner. He says, you know what? He says, I remember he says, most people remember the beginning of a season and they remember the end of the season. They don't remember the bit in the middle. He says, maybe for me this season that's beneficial because that was probably my worst run. Andy then said that the goals that he scored could lead to a Champions League place. How does it feel being so close? And he went, it's a bit surreal. He said, because Newcastle United were in a difficult place when I joined. And he said, when I signed, I spoke about this place having the potential of being a big club. But when you look back, I didn't envisage it happening anytime so soon. But then new owners come in, there's investment, and things have taken a dramatic turn for the better. So yeah, exciting times, really, really pleasing times. Andy asked him on a personal level, does that make it even more surreal for you? And he went, yeah, because if you said to me 2 years ago that I'd have been part of a World Cup squad and I'd scored 20 goals in the Premier League and that I'd have 1 foot in the Champions League, I would have said that that's possible, yeah, but it would be amazing if that was achievable. And, here we are. He asked him what his memories were of the Champions League, and he said, to be honest, playing on the Champions League version of, on the PlayStation, he said, that's my first memories. He said, but like many people, I remember watching the Liverpool game in Istanbul. I remember Solskjaer scoring the winner for Manchester United. And he says, watching those games gives you the motivation and the ambition to, one day play in that competition. And he says, I'm hoping next season that I'll be here and playing a part in that. He then asked about the fans. He says, the fans are getting excited and, they're singing the song, Que Sera, Sera, won't be home for tea, we're going to Italy. How much do the fans deserve this period in the club's history? What impact have they had? And he went, they've made their name in the UK, home and away. And he says, everyone knows that they're, one of, the best fan base in the UK and an amazing home and away support. Taking them to Europe's going to be amazing, and I'm sure they'll have a big impact. Andy asked if Eddie Howe was manager of the season, and he said, I'm biased, of course. I think he should be, and he should win it. He says, I think Arteta's done a great job this season. Pep is Pep. He's done well, he says, but any manager that takes a team from, almost certain relegation to survival and then into the Champions League, they deserve to win Manager of the Year. He then asked him about Tyndall's mad dog reputation and how social media had blown up. He said he doesn't really look at social media a great deal. You get the impression he probably does, but he says he doesn't. But he said he'd seen a few things, and he said, he's one of life's good guys. He's one of the lads, and we can see where it comes from and how this has come about. But in hindsight, he's actually one of the top blokes in football. Then mentioned the fact that the team photo that was taken after Brighton, Tyndall was lying right at the front. He says, was he meant to be in the front row? And he went, yeah, of course, we did that for that reason. Also asking about the Leicester game, he just said, how mad is it going to be on Monday night against Leicester City? And he went, it's going to be magical. He said, first time in like a 20-year period that the club will have been able to qualify for the Champions League, and to do it in front of the home supporters would be fantastic. He says, obviously we have to be respectful. Leicester aren't just going to come here and roll over. There's going to be a focus on what we do and how we perform, but we back ourselves to win every time. So there'll be no complacency. They know they've got a job to do. They don't think they just got to turn up and they're going to be handed the points. They know Leicester are fighting for their lives. So, yeah, no complacency from the lads. Last question from Andy to Callum was Newcastle to qualify for the Champions League or West Ham to win the European Cup that they're playing in. What's the biggest achievement? He says Newcastle getting into the Champions League, of course. He says because if we were in that cup competition, we would win it as well. So yeah, great stuff. 2 good interviews, and credit to Callum Wilson as well. He's a good speaker. First time I've listened to anything other than a 2-minute soundbite on Match of the Day. Really good interview that, and I may well give his podcast a listen. I'm not one for listening to loads of podcasts, but it might be worth tuning into that. I'm sure some of you have done it. Good afternoon, everyone in the chat. As I often do on these shows, I will pop into the chat and see who is there. Good afternoon, BT, Paul Gallant, Kevin Hawthorne. How are the lads? Big win tonight. Hi, Steve. Hope you're well. Keith Richardson. Good to see you. Afternoon, all, and good luck to our team tonight. Ian Toon Trader. Good to finally meet you today. Good to see you, mate. I'm sure we'll have a catch up soon. Hopefully at the do on Friday night. Saturday night, sorry. Stuart Wildblood, let's go. So excited. Time to seal our Champions League qualification. 4 a.m. kickoff here in Australia. Stuart, thanks for tuning in, mate. Honestly, we've got so many people around the world. We've got Kevin there from Florida, you in Australia. Great to see you all in the chat, and nice to hear from you all. Paul Gallant, a big sharer of the channel. Thanks, mate. Hope you're well. Andrew, good afternoon. Hope you are well. Ian says he's nervous for tonight, but I still reckon we'll smash them. Yeah, I think we'll win. I think we'll be more comfortable than we're all thinking. Mozza, hope you're well. I hope you've got tickets for tonight. It was nice to see you at the match the other day. Les, hope you're well too. Happy Monday. Massive thank you to Steve Wraith and John Justice Allen for getting me a signed Shearer 260 board for the charity auction I'm organising at my cricket club. Great to meet you, Steve, mate. Yeah, lovely to meet you too, mate. John, hope you're well, pal. A man of many questions on this platform, and all good ones. Afternoon, everyone. The only reason I'm nervous is because it's ingrained after decades of support here. Logic would indicate we'll be okay. John, you are right, mate. Met a Leicester family in the club shop this morning. The lad bought a Toon top. Wow, Mozza, that's a classic. Paul, very confident we're going to smash Leicester. Trolls, hope you're well. ASM's biggest fan. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're looking forward to the game later on today. And Ian asked, once we have all the NUFC prizes, I'm sure I'll be trying to sell a few tickets to Toon fans. Yeah, well, we'll happily promote it on here, mate, as well, if you're struggling to sell them. And my next bet is back-to-back titles. Just hope odds are better, says Paul. A Wembley final and a top 4 in the first full season. It almost beggars belief. We shouldn't take it for granted. No, definitely not. Alan says he bumped into and chatted with Norwegian fans in the club shop over here without tickets. Advised them to try the box up to see any returns in level 7 or elsewhere. Yeah, I think they're in town with Frode, good friend of mine. So hopefully be bumping into them later on. A good bunch of fans of them. Howe has told his players their Premier League victory over Brighton will count for nothing if they do not beat Leicester to clinch a place in the Champions League, which is the right attitude to have. We know Bruno's not 100%. How good was it to see him supporting Wilson in the box and tucking our 4th away with 90 plus 4 on the clock? What a player. And what a fella, which, yeah, I agree with you as well, 100%. It was great to see him finally get a goal. Darren Lee, hope you're well. Good to see you in the chat as well. 2-0, hoping for a clean sheet with the 3 points. I would agree with you, mate. It'd be nice to get a clean sheet. And if we do, we're halfway there, because a clean sheet means we'll get the point that we need. Be fantastic. I'd love to see Joe Linton and Bruno in double figures. Yeah, it's been an interesting one for goal scorers this season, hasn't it? 59 here, 4 smashed the like, and it's free. 26 now, Paul. Thank you for your effort, mate. But yeah, 26 have hit the like. If you are watching this or watching it on catch up later on, then please do hit the little thumb underneath it. It's free and it does help us out massively. Do you think our fans will be reserved after the match this evening and stay in their seats and not enter onto the pitch? BT, we seem to have that under control. You go back to the 80s when Newcastle fans used to invade the pitch on a regular basis, but people don't do it at Newcastle. It is a lot more reserved. I think these days, 100%. John says, I'd like to see Isak score tonight. Not sure why, I just would. What a prospect he is under Eddie. And Yeah, I agree. Anybody to get the goal tonight, I've got to be honest. I'd like to see Elliot Anderson do it for obvious reasons. Love to see him break his duck. It would be nice to see. Colin, hope you're well, pal. Afternoon all. Hopefully get a quick goal and demoralise Leicester, then go on to win comfortably. Also get some of the youngsters on when it's in the bag. Yeah, an early goal would be nice, Colin. That's what we want. And more looking forward to the Champions League tune at full time. Well, you know what? That's what they're going to do, isn't it? They're definitely going to play the Champions League if we qualify tonight. It'd be nice to do it at home. Dave Bullman, hope you're well. Confident of 3 points tonight. Looking forward to Anderson getting a chance. He's waited patiently. Just come out straight at Leicester. Quick start and an early goal, and their heads will drop. Derek, good to see you on as well. That one game at a time mantra from Eddie's the best way to do it. I think tonight is going to be a tough game, but a one we should win. Who else is in the chat today as well? Big Billy, hope you're well, son. Newcastle, of course, going to play Rangers pre-season, so I will definitely be coming up to Scotland, mate. Be nice to see you. And that would be good. John and plenty of chat going on. Derek the Dilly and a takeover meant Eddie was the man. If it had gone through the previous year, it's very unlikely he would have got a job. So they helped us get the right fella, which is true. So some Liverpool fans saying we had paid refs off, so they bought few players because of VA payments. And yeah, utter rubbish, isn't it? Utter rubbish. Lots of stuff goes on social media. It's best just to avoid it at times. Some really daft comments. I saw that, Dave. Seen Liverpool fans want an investigation because Brighton didn't start a full strength team. Be nothing better than watching them crying today if we get the win. Liverpool fans will always say it's everyone else's fault. I like coffee. Hope you're well. Good to see you in the chat. I thought the Champions League anthem was in English and I was trying to learn it. Brighton pushing for Europe, but we put a weekend side out against us for what reason? What a daft thing to say from the Scousers. Correct. Chris Banks, hope you're well. JB says pizza tastes better in Milan. Yeah, it's that thin kind of pizza which droops. JB in Italy, isn't it? I'll good to hopefully see you tonight, Mozza. I think we'll win tonight. We just need to play it as normal game and not the occasion, says Derek. Big Dog, good to see you in the chat. Champions League, here we come. And Kadosh, nice to see you too. Up the tune, says Kadosh. It's absolutely mental, isn't it? Absolutely mental to think that we are now going to be in that position. I got a feeling that tonight's going to be a good night, Colin. Me too. Keith Gray, good to see you. I'll get crucified for suggesting, but can't be the only one. But if Trips, Joe 7 and Willock are all out and Leicester must win, it'll be harder than we think. That's a big if, though. Be nothing on Trippier. Trippier's fine. Willock's definitely out, I think. But Joe Linton should be okay, mate, is what we're being told. So that would be good. I want third if we win tonight. I think we all do. And MF the villain, have you ever seen a Mac in there? No, mate. Definitely not. Okay, before we go, Toon Stato, who was part of Friday night's shows, he did his little video for the Amigos.
Hello, amigos. What a win last night. 4-1 against Brighton. Our 11th home win of the season, which equaled our best home record since 2003, when we won 15 home wins for the entire campaign. Of course, our best ever season at home is 95-96 when we won 17, but at least we can make it 12 in the upcoming game against Leicester. If we beat Leicester, it's gonna be for the 4th consecutive time after we won last year the game at St. James's Park. We beat them in the League Cup this year. And of course, we won the game at King Power Stadium on Boxing Day. We haven't beaten them 4 times in a row since 1959. Of course, points-wise, we can still get to 75 for the season, which is going to be our second best ever season in the Premier League, again after 95-96 when we finished on 78 points and we famously lost the title in the last weeks of the season. When it comes to goals scored, we have scored 67 so far, which is still very far away from our best achievement, 82 in 93-94. but we can beat our achievement from 96-97 when we scored 74. So we need 7 more goals in the remaining 2 games. But the most important stat, of course, is that 3 points will bring us to the Champions League after 20 years of waiting. Callum Wilson is on 38 goals. Probably this season he cannot make it to the second of all time in the Premier League. Today this is Peter Beardsley with 43, but with 46, sorry. But Callum can do this next season. Of course, he has some way to go to reach Alan Shearer, who is number 1 in the Premier League with 148 goals for us. How are the lads?
Great stuff as always from Toonstato. Okay, you turned me 1 mental night ahead, says Keith. Les says, thanks for this and all your shows, Steve. It's been a pleasure all season. Les, don't forget, we are going all the way through the summer, as usual, with transfer shows and a few ex-players on. So keep an eye out for the shows. Still going to do 7 shows a week throughout the summer. Great crack as always, Steve. Take care. Callum Wilson. Chris says, Toonstat was Mickey Mouse. He is hilarious. Yeah, it was me who noticed that on Friday. And Mozza says, fab show. We might see you later, Steve, for the party. Listen, great stuff. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. If you haven't hit the subscribe button, please do. It's free. Costs you absolutely nothing. If you can make a donation to the channel, hit the little $sign underneath, or please join the channel. It's only $1.99 a month, and that just helps us run the shows. Those of you who can make the party this weekend, please do. It's going to be great. Super Matt is confirmed. He is coming to the event for a couple of hours on Saturday night to meet a few of you. I think we've done about 30 tickets for it, so get yourself along. Should be a good little night. Paul English, good to see you. Brighton had 2 games last week and 2 this week. Liverpool looking for excuses. Yes, 100%. Okay, I'm going to play out with the ads. I will be back tomorrow with Ross Gregory. But until then, enjoy the game. And I'm going for a 3-0 win tonight.
A big thanks to all our sponsors, Skips and Bins, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, website skipsandbins.com, easy contract free and pay-as-you-go waste collection. A big thanks to Mr. Vicky's sauces, which are handmade in Cumbria. You can find them at their website, mrvickies.co.uk. If you want to place an order, call 01768 210 102 or email info@mrvickies.co.uk. A big thanks to Media Arts for all the help with the video side of things, and at qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, Newcastle, and the guys who run our website, NUFCmatters.com. If you like the channel, please hit the like underneath the video. It helps us grow. And click share and share to your other social media. If you want to help us financially, please click join. And there's a range of different packages and it explains how you can do that. If you want to become a cult member and receive these goodies, a scarf, a pen, and a cup and a membership card and entry into the monthly draw, for a one-off fee of £25, simply go to nufcmatters.com and find cult membership. If you've got a smartphone, put it over this QR code now. It'll take you straight there. We're also available as a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and other podcast providers. And we also support the food bank on this channel. The Matchday Bucket helps you donate virtually. Go to nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk to find out more. We've got some events coming up over the course of the next 12 months. An evening with John Anderson takes place at the Tynemouth Surf Cafe. Only limited tickets available. 13th of June. Go to their website to buy tickets. Bend it like Bobby. Cometh the hour, cometh the man. And just after the hour, the man did cometh at the double, as it was time to bend it like Bobby. It's a comedy play. It's a rehearsed reading by Jim Orr. It features myself and a few other cast members. Friday the 16th of June. Tickets on sale at newcastlelegends.com and they're only £5. An evening with Frank Clark. Well, this is our Christmas due. Thursday, December the 7th. Tickets are £15 from nufcmatters.com at the Tyneside Irish Centre. And a big one for the new year, January the 25th. Keegan, Waddle and Beardsley and special guests back together, the class of 1984 at the Tyne Theatre and Opera House on Westgate Road. Tickets available direct from the venue. If you like T-shirts and you want a few for the summer, get yourself to nufcmatters.com. The Isaac T-shirt is proven very popular.